guys, welcome to another episode of Haven Theory. This is Alex. For today's topic, I wanted to talk about fairness. And more specifically, is life fair? And how fair should life be? Now, to begin this discussion, I think it's appropriate to define what fairness means according to various dictionaries. So, fairness, according to various definitions, involves being free from bias, dishonesty, or injustice. It can also mean that which is legitimately sought, pursued, done, given, or that which is proper under the rules. Now, that last part, that which is proper under the rules, I think is an important thing to focus on throughout this discussion. So, when considering fairness, there's the implication that there's some standard of fairness that situations, circumstances, and scenarios must meet for us to say that fairness exists. And any deviation from that standard is what we call unfairness. So, in other words, fairness and unfairness cannot exist without some reference point, basis, or rule against which fairness or unfairness can be measured. There must be some rules-based framework that is implicitly or explicitly invoked in discussions of fairness. Therefore, when considering whether something is fair or unfair, we must ask, well, under what rules? What rules are we playing by? And only when we understand things within the framework of the rules in operation can we begin to consider notions of fairness or unfairness. Suppose we consider a game of chess. Chess has strict rules as to how the game has to be played. For instance, bishops can only move along a diagonal of its own color. Kings can only move one square at a time, and pawns can be promoted to any other piece in the game once it reaches the opponent's backmost rank. These are what we call some rules of chess. Now, taken in this context, we can now begin a conversation about what is fair and what is unfair in a game of chess. We can call a situation in which one player moves his king 3 squares in one turn, while the other player hasn't, as unfair because it violates the rules of chess. We can consider it unfair because moving a king 3 spaces is not proper under the current rules of chess, so it would be unfair for one player to be able to do it and the other player not to. There's another component of fairness and unfairness that must be taken into account, and that is the notion of the asymmetric application of a rule and the universal application of a rule. And I'm going to say that again. Another component to fairness that has to be taken into account is the notion of the asymmetric application of a rule and the universal application of a rule. So rules which are asymmetrically applied can, in general, be considered unfair if the overarching framework calls for a universal application of the rule. Rules which are universally applied can also be considered unfair if the overarching framework calls for an asymmetric application of the rules. So fairness and unfairness depend entirely on the overarching set of rules that form the frame of the situations we are taking into consideration. So context matters. Context matters. We can only identify situations and scenarios where something might have been fair or unfair only against a backdrop of an overarching set of rules or standards, because without them we couldn't identify what was fair or not fair. When your opponent makes an illegal move in chess, you may say, hey, that's not fair because a rule was violated. And in that case, you would be correct because an illegal move in chess is not proper under the rules and hence unfair. So things are only fair or unfair according to the set of rules that encompass situations. So let's get back to the subject of this video. Is life fair, and how fair should life be? Well, now that I've thought about it, I think that the answer is yes. Life is fair. Life is fair because we are living according to the rules of life. We do not live life according to the rules of anything else. Simply the rules of life. The rules of life is the framework within which and under which we operate and live and have our being. So regardless of the situation anyone finds themselves in, it is fair because the rules of life made it so. Whether we are in tragic situations, stuck in a rut, in a not so happy place, we're facing some really harrowing events in our life. These things are fair. Because these are the rules that govern life. So, an unfair occurrence would require a god of some sort stepping into our dimension, our time-space reality, and completely overriding our rules of life, maybe with a cheat code, and giving him an unfair advantage over everyone else. That would be unfair. Because we wouldn't be operating by, or he wouldn't be operating by the same rules of life that everyone else is. However, absent that, all life is a combination of, the laws of nature, the laws of social relationships, the laws of economics, of capital, of industry, of you name it. All right? And those laws comprise the rules of life. So, everything taken together, everything is fair. We're all operating under the same rules of life. Now, you might say, oh, well, I was born into this situation. Yeah. But that's still part of the framework. Because our parents were also operating by the same rules. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our ancestors, all operating by the same rules of life. Now, whether some of the things that happen in life or some of the things that we do to each other, now whether those actions are moral or immoral, I think it's a that's a different question. And I also think that morality is baked into the rules of life as well. So while life allows for suffering to occur and for people to inflict that suffering, I also think that life imbued itself, and especially, we humans, with laws of morality. And I think that has an impact on, life itself too. So I do think that all in all, life is fair because we are all operating by the set of rules that govern all of life on this planet. And yeah. So if you have any thoughts about that, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And I guess that's it for today. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.